Hello, everyone, and thanks to all that have joined so far. We're going to give everyone just another minute or two to sign on before we get started. So we'll be back on with you shortly. All right, thanks again to all that we've already spoken to and to all the new people that are joining in. We're going to get started now. We have a few housekeeping things and some quick instructions to go through, so that'll give time for everyone else that's still coming on board a chance to log in. But we welcome you to the first webinar of our series for 2021 today, and we're excited to present to you our thoughts on developing the optimal recruitment strategy that'll help keep your study on track budget-wise and timeline-wise. Just a quick introduction, I'm Gabby St. Remy. I'm the Director of Marketing and Patient Engagement for CSSi, and I oversee the development of all of our recruitment materials, as well as any direct-to-patient outreach we do through traditional and digital advertising. I also have Ryan Haynes with me, who is our Executive Director of Clinical Solutions, and I'll pass the mic over to him shortly for an introduction and a quick bio to himself. But before we do that, just wanted to go over a few housekeeping things. On your screen, you'll see a section for questions and answers. As we go through the presentation, if you have any questions for us, please feel free to drop those in that section. We'll either answer them directly through the chat message, respond back to you, or we'll tag the question to answer live. We will also try our best to answer all questions as they come in, but if not, please feel free to follow up with us directly after the webinar, or we'll do our best to reach back out to you with those answers. We also have a chat feature at the bottom for you, where you can either private message us as panelists or send your message to everyone who is joining us today. And then the third feature we have is some polling questions as Ryan goes through his presentation. We will have a few different polling questions that will show up on your screen throughout. The questions will be open for about 10 to 15 seconds. And then once we close it, you'll be able to see everyone's responses and the percentages for each of the answers that we have. And just another quick highlight, we are recording this presentation today, and we will send out a link to the recording afterwards for everyone who either wants to have that or was not able to join us. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Ryan for an introduction to himself, and then he'll get us started.
Thank you, Gabby, and thank you everyone for joining today. It's nice to see so many names that we've worked with in the past and talked with in the past. Last year was challenging for everyone, not having industry shows where we all got together to kind of do these collaborations while we were at DIA, Scope, etc. So this year, CSSi will embark on a number of these webinars in our series so that we can keep the conversation going while there may not be trade shows going on. Just a little bit about myself. My button is kind of not there. I've been at CSSi for, I'll be 12 years in May. I've done a number of things. I at one point oversaw our site network called Site Management Solutions. I helped to build our infrastructure for our medical device CRO and our CSSi Life Sciences division. Currently, I oversee our clinical solutions group, in which we make our clinical strategies and patient recruitment strategies for our clients. Prior to CSSi, I worked at a biotechnology company here in Maryland focused on oncology, women's health, and inflammatory diseases. So I hope to bring my unique background of having worked at a site, a CRO, and a sponsor and a vendor all in one to give you some different perspectives on how to develop your optimal patient recruitment strategies. I will, so we don't slow this down. Okay, so like Gabby mentioned, the chat is open, the Q&A is open. Please feel free to use those. We'd like to keep this as interactive as possible. So when we're working with our clients, either prospectively or doing repeat studies, these are some of the key things that people always tell us on why they don't need to develop a patient recruitment strategy. Some of these may be things that you yourself have stated. A lot of, especially for rare diseases and oncology, you mainly, most of your sites may be KOL sites that see high volumes of patients with your condition. And you may think that they don't need a patient recruitment strategy. You may be rolling over from a phase 2 study to a phase 3 study, in which you're going to use the same trial, but you're not realizing that maybe in phase 2, your sites have exhausted all of the eligible patients from that would be eligible for your study in the phase 2 study. And then plus in phase 3, your IE criteria may be a little bit more stringent. So your sites, while they may be top enrollers, they may need additional support. Rare indications, sponsors feel that they don't need to do a patient recruitment strategy. You spend a lot of time in feasibility and you only want to select sites with large databases of patients, which is fine, but how are you going to help your sites connect with that large database of patients, get them through to consent? Oncology companies feel as if patient recruitment support is not necessary, which is fine, but then you go down the avenue of getting 0.1 patients per site per month per site. So what can we do to impact oncology studies, or some things that we'll uncover here today as well. And then when it talks about supporting your sites, it's always, we don't need another person contacting the sites and creating additional burden on our sites. And that's one of the things that we learned here during COVID is that now sponsors and CROs have been offering sites additional support to help them with their enrollment due to a number of sites downsizing with staff due to COVID. And from that, we've learned that a number of sites reported that they've always wanted this support with things such as outreach to their their referring physicians and to their community advocacy groups. So let's keep that energy after COVID, and continue to support sites with their enrollment efforts.
Quickly before you go on to the next slide, could you just clarify?
These are what I call the big E's on patient recruitment and retention. No matter what the therapeutic area is, whether you do chronic ambulatory conditions or oncology and rare diseases, 4 things are always key. You have to engage with your patients. Identify where they are in your community or in your doctor's database and bring them through to your study. You have to educate them, make them aware of what their study requirements are and what their patient journey is going to be within your study. Then you have to get them to the site and then make that enrollment process as smoothly as possible. And most importantly, you spent a lot of effort in enrolling your patients. Now you have to keep them through the end, especially when you have studies with a high number of study visits, or if it's a long-term study where they may only go to the site every 6 months over a 3-year period. So you have to have a strategy to keep them in the study as well. So we're going to open it up for our first polling question. Who monitors your recruitment plan? And your selections are sites, your CRAs, your project manager, or your recruitment vendor. We'll give everyone a few more seconds. Very good. So it appears that greater than 50% of the respondents say the project manager oversees the recruitment plan, with only 7% of you leaving recruitment to the sites, which I think is great. Sites have a lot of other things to focus on, including your CRAs. They have a lot of other things to focus on as well. So keeping the recruitment oversight at the project management or the vendor level is the best approach. So now, the key elements to any optimal recruitment strategy. There are 5 things, and you may hear me refer to all of them as the most important, because they are. Everything has to work together, so this rolls out seamlessly. The first is patient research. The second is creative development. The third is your actual patient recruitment strategy. Your fourth is your patient pre-screening, getting those referrals through the funnel. And like I mentioned, the last part is your patient retention. The most important part before you begin to develop your recruitment strategy is to figure out from your feasibility data and from your own expectations of your sites is where do you expect your patients to come from? Most of the times when we work with our clients, in rescue situations, there's a big disconnect on where the sites thought the patients were going to come from and where the sponsors thought the patients would come from. We just recently worked with a client and we were putting together an advertising campaign, and the sponsor said, we want 30% of patients to come from advertising. So then when we did our assessment of the sites and we're making our enrollment plans and advertising plans with the sites, we asked the site what their percentage of patients they were going to get from their practice. And the site said, well, 30%. So you have 30% from the sponsor and 30% from the site. So now you have 60% of your 40% of your patients just sitting out. They're supposed to come from no man's land. So that is the main point to look at before you even develop. It's a key part of developing your enrollment strategy. So your patient research. Where are your patients at in the community? Who is your target audience? Not only your patient audience, but your secondary audiences, your caregivers, your medical professionals who see these patients. Where do your patients go to receive information? Those are key elements that you have to look for. We like to call that building your patient pathway. Where are you going to intersect with a person in order to get your study information in front of them so that they can make an informed decision in joining your clinical trial? Whether it's just their normal day-to-day activities of gyms and grocery stores, or where they go for health-related information, whether that's their medical professional or internet websites, etc. What type of doctors that they see? That is very key. Not only as their primary doctor that they may be seeing for a condition, but what other doctors may your target patient go to. You may be doing a migraine study and you may have neurology sites, but where else what other doctors do your patients go see? You may use an an obstetrician as your medical professional that's referring patients. So just figure out where they are at in their healthcare plan and where they're what other physicians that they would go see so that they may refer patients. And then the last point, number 5, is what would motivate them to join their trial, and most importantly, what would hinder them from joining your study. That is key, especially when you're talking about your uh, diversity and inclusive research initiatives that have become key here lately. You know, figure out how to educate minority populations on your study, on research in general, to bridge that gap so that you can meet your D&I goals that FDA is mandating for a lot of studies these days. Step 2, creative development, which is key. How are you going to attract patients for your study? Our goal here is to make the information on a level that everyone can read and it's relatable to them. These are typical toolkits that everyone uses for their study. You have your patient education materials and your physician educational materials. Um, but the most important things about your education materials, whether they're physician or patient, is what is your strategy to actually use the materials and to deploy them not only within your PI's practice, but within their medical professional referring physicians practices or within the community. Um, you put a lot of effort into making flyers, brochures, branded boxes to ship the materials, but what is the strategy to actually get those materials deployed? One of the things we like to do is share best practices across sites. You have to remember that less than 10% of sites have a marketing department within them. So you're mainly dealing with medical professionals who don't have a marketing background. So you have to help them to be able to deploy your educational materials and to use those within their own practice or within their community, making sure those people at the front desk who may not be involved in research, but will be the frontline people to see your patients that are eligible for your study. Make sure they're aware of your study and how to use the materials. Step 3, patient recruitment. Um, we like to say this starts with building a funnel of your patients, whether that's your percentage of, we just talked about your percentage of patients that's going to come from your PI's practice or database, your percentage of patients that's going to come from advertising, and then how are you going to supplement that pool of patients. Remember that your strategy for patient recruitment is unique to each site. And not only is it unique to each site, it's unique to each country. Um, One of the things that we've always seen over the years is we make a strategy for recruitment based on North America, and then we try to roll it out to our rest of the world sites, and it doesn't necessarily translate because there's different cultural acceptances for countries, there's regulatory acceptances. So make sure you have a strategy for each country that you're going in. GDPR is something that you will have to take into consideration when you are making recruitment strategies for ex-US and ex-North American countries, just because where your data is stored and how your data is transferred is very key part of GDPR and how it relates to patient recruitment. When it gets down to the individual site level, all sites have different needs. Some sites may just need advertising. Some sites may need chart review support. Some sites may need support with reaching out to the referring physician. So make sure it's not a cookie cutter approach that you're rolling out across all sites in all countries. Some outreach tools to consider. We broke these into 2 categories. You have your traditional and digital advertising, and then your non-traditional advertising approaches. You know, as we see it right now, Facebook and Google are still king of the hill as far as online campaigns. Digital has become pretty much the go-to source over the last few years, but one of the things to consider is that a digital-only strategy may limit you. And lately we've been seeing with larger studies of hitting saturation points within a media market where at a certain point your messaging is working against you if you're just deploying one media vehicle. So keep things open to other media vehicles as much as possible. Um, Radio and TV are still great avenues, even newspaper for certain patient populations. Your non-traditional advertising, such as your doctor's professional organizations, getting the word out to them. ASCO is always a huge one. American Heart is always a huge one to get the word out. Getting your doctors to do public relations and some free speaking events within their community is always huge. Um, so deploying these things as part of your strategy are very effective. Now we have our second poll question. Do you give your sites an advertising budget, or do you prefer to run a centralized campaign for them? All right, I think we can show the results. Oh, great. We have a 62% centralized campaign, 38% individual site advertising budget, which is good. I think most sites would prefer centralized campaign. There are a number of sites who prefer to receive their own media budget, but the challenge with giving sites their own media budget is you don't have the metrics on the impact of your advertising dollars. It's hard for you to um, calculate your ROI from your advertising campaign. One of the things about working with a centralized patient recruitment vendor is, all of the information is centralized and reported back to you. So now that with a vendor, you can truly understand what your ROI is. So one of the things that we touched on earlier is giving your study coordinator some support. We did a recent poll of sites, and it's been reported in the literature, and our data was fairly similar to what was reported by NIH, is that about 72% of sites don't have sufficient resources to dedicate their patient recruitment. So how are you going to supplement them, and how are you going to support them? Some of the things that sites have been requesting for lately during COVID is support with chart reviews, support with reaching out to medical professionals. Pre-COVID, sites would want support in doing community awareness events, 5Ks, local walks, etc. So these are just some things to put into your overall strategy. How are you going to support your sites with their recruitment efforts? The top 20% of sites kind of function as machines, and you don't need to help them. The lower 20% of sites, there's not much anyone can do to help impact them. So it's really focusing on that 60 to 65% of sites in the middle and making sure that they can meet their enrollment goal. One of the big things with supporting sites and with running an advertising campaign is pre-screening. So when we talk about determining, your number of patients that are going to come from advertising and your number of patients that are going to come from your site. When you're building your advertising funnel, one of the things that you're going to have to realize is, how are you going to pace your referrals? Um, and then how are those sites going to pre-screen patients? So are you going to use a centralized pre-screening method such as a web and phone screener? Or are you going to use a call center? Or are you going to use a live secondary screener? Those are all things to consider when you are developing your pre-screening strategy. And then how those patients go through that funnel. So you have a patient that shows interest either through an online ad, a radio ad, a TV ad. They react either through a website or a phone screener or a call center. And how are those patients transferred to the site? And then how are they sourced and tracked all the way through consent? Are all things that you need to consider so that you can maximize your ROI. One of the things that's big when you're pre-screening patients is response time. We like to have majority of our patients followed up on within 24 to 48 hours. An article recently that showed that 80% of people who reply to an online advertisement or email campaign want to be followed up with it within 48 hours. So that right there shows that you'll get a huge drop off and a huge increase in your attrition rate from your referrals if you aren't following up within 48 hours. So you should assess with your sites whether they have the capabilities to do this follow-up, or do you need to provide some sort of support. Like I touched on for a second ago, maybe the sites have the infrastructure to follow up with the referrals, but maybe you need to slow down the pace of your referrals, which means slow down your online campaign or slow down your TV or digital campaign, or TV or radio campaign, just so that the pace of referrals to the sites is something that the sites can handle. And then furthermore, have a system to track the referrals from first contact through either consent or screen fill, etc. So you've put a lot of effort into enrolling your patients. You've got them through consent and randomization. Now your most important part that I feel these days is retaining them. A lot of studies have a lot more study visits these days that requires a lot more burden on patients, or visits are stretched out over a 2 or 3 year window in which you have to retain patients because it's more expensive to replace a patient than to retain them. We have our final poll question, and that is, how do you handle patient retention for your programs? And your options are: we let our sites handle patient retention, we utilize an automated platform, or my studies do not require retention. So based on the responses, 81% of you are having sites to manage your patient retention. 16% are using some type of automated platform, and 3% have studies that do not require retention support, which is probably about right. About 3% or about acute care studies don't usually require retention support. I would like to say, depending on your overall burden on your sites, 81% seems to be a high number for sites to manage retention. Because some things involved in retention include follow-up calls, making sure that diaries are being completed in a timely manner, um, medication adherence, and things like that. So that is a lot to put on a study coordinator. That's one thing that you, if you are seeing, high dropout rates or a high number of patients who are withdrawing consent or a number of patients that become lost to follow-up, that's maybe something that you want to consider speaking with your sites about, especially if you have sites who have a lot of loss to follow-up patients. That's for us usually a red flag that the site has called the patient twice, hasn't been able to reach them, and they just check loss to follow-up. So make sure that as part of your retention strategy, you have things to mitigate those things that will cause for high dropout rates. Some of the retention solutions that are out there, like 16% of you agreed you're using an automated platform, which are great. They give study visit reminders, diary reminders, uh, reminders for study medications, especially when it's a study medication that's not a daily medication. You know, you see medication adherence problems when it's, once weekly pill or once weekly subcutaneous injection. Um, in addition to automated platforms, there's a number of things you can do with live live persons to contact patients or study givers or caregivers, just to check in with them throughout the study, just to see if they have any challenges or if they're going to have an issue meeting their next appointment, just so patients don't uh, just get lost to follow. One of the key things that I like to say about your retention, your recruitment and retention strategy is metrics. This is a data-driven industry. Um, how are you going to get metrics in on your recruitment activities and make any adjustment? One of the things that we like to do, which we like to suggest to our clients, is don't be scared to just start your program with a short pilot program. See what's working, see what's not working, and then deploy it across all your sites or expand it within each of your sites. Measure your results in real time or on a fairly frequent basis so you can make adjustments. You know, Years ago, we used to just say everyone's getting TV and run TV for 3 weeks, and at the end of the month, you know, we don't have any patients. That's one of the things the patient recruitment vendors kind of receive a black eye about, that it's expensive and doesn't yield much. But the paradigm is shifting. It's a more cautious approach in rolling out your strategy. So one of the things I'd like for you to consider is don't be afraid to do a pilot program, and make sure your results that you're getting from either your pilot or your main program are things that are helpful. The number of referrals, the status of your referrals, those are things that you can look at to help you to figure out how you can support your sites or what else that you can deploy as part of your study. Um, it helps you when you have to do your own internal discussions to get more budget for your program. So figuring out what data you want on the front end is very key. So even if it takes a little bit more time to have that discussion with your vendor or your internal recruitment team, it's a key part of your strategy. Now we will open up the floor for any questions.
Thank you so much, Ryan. We have had a few questions come in, and I'll read those out to you. The first one that we had was around advertising. So if you're giving your advertising budget to your sites, since all advertisements should be submitted to ECs and IRBs before they're used, how does it work practically? Are the advertisements developed before or during the study?
Very good question. So what we like to do is develop the advertisements fairly centrally. So the images and study branding will be the same across all sites. You definitely want to make sure your logos and branding are the same across all sites. And then the only thing that will have to be updated at the site level, if you're not using a centralized call center or a centralized study website, will be the site-specific information. And so, especially when you have a lot of local IRB sites, if you get those, a lot of times if you get the patient recruitment and education materials and advertising materials approved through your central IRB, it makes it easier when you submit to your local IRBs into your country-specific EC. So now that one IRB has approved, it's an easier process. And it saves you some time and expense. Submitting to a number of ECs can get pretty cost prohibitive for some studies.
Thanks, Ryan. Another question that came through is, what suggestions would you have for oncology studies where patients are likely to get their information from their physicians and retention is typically not an issue due to the nature of the cancer?
No, very good question. Like I said, prior to CSSi, I did 11 years with a biotechnology company working mostly 80% of our compounds were in oncology. And the biggest thing is you have to identify where you're at in the patient's treatment. If you're usually phase 1 to 2A, you're going to be lower down the list, and or the patients are going to have failed a number of first and second line treatments. So they may be more prone to switching an oncologist in order to get into a study. And once you get into your later phase studies, you will be trying to move your way up the treatment cycle. So you may try to get into first or second line treatments. The biggest thing is education. Letting the patient know that a lot of times they may be getting this study, the study drug with standard of care. One of the advantages of oncology is there's no placebo control. So letting the patient know that they will be getting some sort of study medication or approved medication is key. A lot of times patients who have researched clinical trials on the internet, they'll immediately gravitate towards placebo and figure, I've got a tumor, I don't want to risk the chance of a placebo. So educating them is key. And then also educating the doctors referring physicians. A lot of times you'll have a group practice of medical oncologists who may either review patients at a tumor board or during grand rounds, or you may have a community physician who refers patients into a larger university setting after patients get to a certain point in their treatment pathway. So making sure that the referring physicians are educated on this study as well is very key.
Kind of going along what you just were speaking about, we had two questions come in that were pretty similar, so I'll read them both together for you. The first question is, what are your thoughts on physician referral network campaigns, and how would CSSi approach that type of strategy? And then along a similar line is, do referral networks really work for studies? What if physicians are afraid they could lose their patient by referring them on?
No, very good question. I will take the second question first. So, um, yes, you will get feedback from some physicians who will say that no, I don't want to lose patients to a clinical study. Um, but it's also educating them on, okay, maybe you're not losing your patient. Maybe the patient is just going to the referring physician's office for a very specific small part of their treatment, and that the rest of their care will be um, guided by their primary, let's just say, neurologist or endocrinologist. Um, but on a broader scope, the approach to medical professional outreach, as we call it, it's we have a different approach. So yes, we are impactful with doing medical professional outreach because we look at it in two ways. So, like I said, a neurologist may be part of a regional group of neurologists in which referring patients within the network is not an issue because the revenues are shared. So, at the end of the day, patients, unfortunately, are considered revenue to sites. So, keeping them within the group practice, as long as the referring physician knows that the patient will stay within the group practice, that is key. So when we're doing things like that, we work with the doctor to figure out who are his or her naturally referring physicians and reach out to them to make sure they're educated about the study. Um, and then as we touched on earlier, some of the things we do is we look at the patient's overall journey, especially when you get to patient populations where your target demographic may be 45 plus or 40 plus. Those patients will see more than one doctor. So they may be looking, the study may be ran at a GI practice. So now we can reach out to the community of primary care physicians that the patients may see, or there may be a women's health doctor within the close proximity of the PI who may also see these patients. So it's looking for um, medical professionals who are non-competing and opening up the pathway that way. And then also working with, like I said, the naturally referring physicians. And those are your successful ways to medical professional physician outreach.
Thanks, Ryan. Another question that came through was, do you have experience working in sites in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Latin America is an area that we work in fairly frequently. One of the things that's becoming great about Latin America is that the main issue used to be the startup times. So countries such as Brazil and Colombia, startup times were so long that by the time you got a country up and running, the study was closing. So now that that is changing, a lot more sponsors are going to Latin America, and we have what we call our local enrollment specialists in 40 different countries. So we do have resources in Latin America. The Caribbean, outside of Puerto Rico, I don't think a lot of research has gone on in a lot of Caribbean countries, but it's something that we can assess and get you some information back.
Just furthering along that discussion, the next question is, can you please talk about CSSi's global reach?
Yes. So, like I said, we are a global firm, and I like to say we're truly global. We have a physical footprint in over 40 countries. So one of the things that we decided many years ago when we started on global studies was to be the most impactful. We felt like we needed people on the ground who not only spoke the local language, but also knew the local regulations of things that are not only accepted by the regulators, but things that are accepted by culturally. You can get to a country where, yes, you can run advertising, but culturally it's not accepted. Or, there's some European countries where patient recruitment support isn't wanted only because the PIs feel like if you're giving me support, if I accept support, that means I'm accepting failure. So just knowing those things were key to us. And so we do our global studies both through CSSi, FTEs, and through trained contractors and subcontractors. But that is done in over 40 countries.
Thanks, Ryan. And another question, what does CSSi offer that is better than other recruitment companies?
I would say our differentiator, because there are some very there's some other very great patient recruitment companies, and we see each other at shows. We're all friends. But I would say our differentiators are transparency. We're very big on metrics and providing information. And every study doesn't run perfect, and we are very big at making adjustments to our programs, being transparent with our clients, our local enrollment specialists, as we call them, or former study coordinators. That's been one of our key differentiators over the past few years for studies that don't typically just rely on advertising and need some other type of support services to drive enrollment. One of the things about CSSI, we're very collaborative. We can come into programs just to do a very small portion of the program. That could be just providing our local enrollment specialist. That could be just advertising. And we can work hand in hand with your other patient recruitment providers. That's one of the things I should have mentioned earlier. That don't be scared to have multiple providers on a program, but as part of your strategy, make sure that you have a plan that everything rolls out to your sites seamlessly. So that's one of the things we can do. We can manage all the recruitment vendors and to manage all the data centrally. So you have one portal to log in to see all the results. As an industry, I think we are getting into too many portals to log into just to get the same information. And I think one of the things that we're different on is that we are truly full service and in-house. About 98% of our services are handled by um, CSSi FTEs. Um, so the only things that are outsourced is, like I said, the um, enrollment specialists that we may have in certain countries, or if there is a specific need for patient payments or something, we would bring in a vendor, but we're truly full service in-house.
Thank you, Ryan. Another question for you. What suggestions do you have for sites that are running more than one study at the same time and over? How can you support patient recruitment and continuing patient pools?
You broke up a little bit at the first part of the question, Gabby.
Oh, sure. I'll reread it. What suggestions do you have for sites that are running more than one study at the same time and over? How can you support patient recruitment and continuing patient pools?
Yeah, so now that is a very good question. So it's like everything else. You have to support your sites and keep your study top of mind. Um, and when you look at competing studies, it's not just a migraine to migraine study. It could be a, migraine to an epilepsy study. Whatever is competing for either your patients or for your study team's time is what we consider competing trials. And trials are staff resources are usually allotted to where site staff feels the most appreciated. You know, they feel that you're supporting them and you are, um, you know, helping them with solutions and, you're being a partner with them. Your study will, be on top of mind for a study coordinator. And when a patient comes in, they'll think about your study first. So work with your sites to make sure they feel appreciated, make sure the study's staying top of mind. If they have questions either for you or any of your medical affairs or your medical monitor, make sure they get followed up in a timely manner as well. Like I mentioned earlier, patients want to be followed up in 24 or 48 hours, and sites want to be followed up even sooner, because if they have an ideal patient who's in front of them and are coming in tomorrow and they have a question, if they don't have a response from you, then they'll just look at another study. So keeping your study top of mind will keep it at the top of the list. That's outside of a competing study having a larger budget. But if all things are equal, just support your sites as best as you can, and to keep, if necessary, funnel them additional referrals, but make sure you track those referrals to your study. A lot of times, if sites are working on multiple studies in the same condition, they could use your advertising dollars to refer for competing studies. So making sure that your referrals are sourced and you can track them all the way through to some sort of resolution is key.
Thanks, Ryan. The next question is, does CSSi have a footprint in China and or Japan?
Yes, we do have a footprint in China and Japan. That would be one of the areas where we would utilize either a subcontractor for Asia Pac.
Thanks, Ryan. The next question, during the COVID pandemic, what is CSSi's recommendation, as several patients are concerned to go to the institutions for their study procedures?
No, that's a very good question, something that we probably see at a minimum on a daily basis when we're following up with patients. So some of the things that you can consider is a protocol amendment to allow for telehealth visits. A lot of sponsors went through the process of adding telehealth to their protocols. Now, that may not be useful in some studies, especially if there's a complex procedure that needs to happen, um, or things like that. But if you can minimize the number of visits, that will help patients who are not only those who are currently enrolled in your studies, but the ones who are thinking about joining your study. Some other things are to help coordinate the patient's visit at the site, to limit their exposure, to ensure them that it can be as swift as a visit as possible, so that they are limiting their exposure to other people. And then it's education. If you need to provide someone to talk to patients and caregivers, don't forget about your caregivers if you're doing things such as neurocognition studies where it's caregiver driven too. That's another person who now has to go out and be exposed to COVID-19 potentially. So make sure that they're educated on the site's protocols around PPE, temperature checks, et cetera. So you are minimizing those fears.
Thank you. And then one last question we had come through is, patient diversity is a big focus these days in clinical trials. What tools and processes does CSSi use to ensure diversity is being followed up and adhered to?
Oh, yes. I think this is one of the items that's near and dear to me. That I'm hoping that if we have enough feedback from some of our marketing, that we will do a whole seminar on D&I and research. But for us, it's our approach is very targeted and very um, where we feel that D&I has fallen short is um, for years we just translated our materials to Spanish and deployed them to our sites. Not taking into consideration of you know changing some of the images and maybe having to change some of the language so that it truly um, resonates with maybe a Hispanic population. And then when you're looking at things such as the African American population, it's looking at ways to educate, especially minorities, on research in general. Um, Most patients realize that they have a condition, but the gap on education about clinical trials between minorities and non-minorities is huge. So, and then overcoming the knowns within the minority populations, such as Henrietta Lacks and Tuskegee, are huge. We saw this bubble up during the uh, coronavirus vaccine studies. That everyone put a strategy together to enroll tens of thousands of patients, but no one put a strategy together to meet their D&I goals until we got to the end. And minorities were well underrepresented in studies. So the only solution was stop enrolling non-minorities. Where if a D&I strategy had been deployed at the beginning, enrollment would have been exceeded by weeks, if not months.
Thank you so much, Ryan, for a great presentation today. We thank everyone who took the time to join us. We have about 3 minutes left, but I did not see any other questions come through. On our screen is the contact information for Ryan and myself. If you have any questions that come up after we end the call today, please feel free to follow up with us directly. We'd be happy to speak with each of you. And maybe we have one more question. For studies starting before COVID pandemic, the impact of COVID was very strong on recruitment. Any suggestions to stimulate recruitment again in an ongoing study?
Yes, so I think one of the things that uh, everyone has kind of, and I don't want to use the cliche, the new normal, but everyone has gotten into a routine where they can manage their studies within a COVID environment. Like I just touched on, whether that's doing telehealth visits or whether they can ensure patients can come to their sites safely. And yes, COVID put a huge impact negatively on enrollment for studies across the board. But one of the things that I would say that the um, vaccine studies gave everyone hope to, that you can still enroll for studies and patients will still come to your site. And that kind of energized everyone towards the end of the third quarter and fourth quarter last year. And we're seeing more studies not only start to enroll patients, but more studies to re-enroll patients. So it's working with your sites to see what support they need. Advertising is still a great way to generate referrals for sites. Um, it's looking at those patients who may have been interested previously, who may still be eligible. That may be tough because it's been a year, so they may have started therapies that may no longer make them eligible. But no, just talk to your sites, poll your sites. I always say you don't need, a vendor or another resource. You can just do a quick poll of your sites and ask them, what support can we provide you to jumpstart enrollment? It could be something as far as, send us more referrals, or it could be, we need help reaching into our database and contacting patients. So pull your site, see what they would like. And if anything, you can reach out to a number of patient recruitment vendors. I'm always available to give you some suggestions based on your protocol. That are things that that can re-energize your sites and your study.
And that takes us to the top of the hour. We want to be cognizant of everyone's time and be respectful of your time. So if you have any follow-up questions for us, please feel free to shoot us an email or give us a call. We're happy to speak with you about any of your current studies or any upcoming studies that you have. And if there's any way CSSi can support you, please let us know. Or if it's just a quick question for us, we're happy to answer that as well. With that, we wish all of you a happy Wednesday, and we hope that you enjoy either the rest of your morning or your afternoon.